Most fail not because of a lack of effort. They fail because they wander through the corridors of existence without ever realizing that they carry the keys to their own prison cells. The world sees a man broken by poverty, a woman crushed by the weight of 1,000 no's, or a dreamer silenced by the cold indifference of reality. And it calls these things fate. But there is a secret, a pulsating power hidden beneath the surface of the mundane, that Napoleon Hill calls the greatest secret of all. It is the realization that every human being is the master of a miracle-working power so potent that it can transform the bitterest defeat into a victory that shakes the very foundations of the earth. This is not the story of magic or mysticism, but the chronicle of the human spirit's capacity to command the forces of the universe through the sheer application of a focused will. Imagine a man standing at the edge of a precipice, his pockets empty, his reputation in tatters, and his heart heavy with the gray ash of despair. To the casual observer, he is finished, but within him, there is a second self, a silent, invincible partner that awakens only when the first self has been beaten into submission by the harsh realities of life. This narrative is the journey of discovering that partner, the one who does not know the meaning of the word impossible, and who speaks in the language of miracles. The story begins in the shadowed valleys of human struggle, where we meet individuals who have reached the absolute end of their rope. Consider the man who has spent decades building a career, only to see it vanish in a single night of economic upheaval. He sits in the dark, the silence of his home amplified by the ticking of a clock that seems to count down the seconds of his relevance. He feels the cold hand of fear gripping his throat, telling him that he is too old, too tired, and too late to start again. But it is precisely in this moment of total darkness that the miracle begins to stir. The book describes this as the seed of an equivalent benefit. It is a law as immutable as gravity. For every heartache, every failure, and every disappointment, there is a seed of a greater advantage. The tragedy for most is that they look so long and so regretfully at the closed door that they never see the one that has been kicked wide open by the very force of their misfortune. The narrative follows the psychological transformation of those who stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What did this happen for?" This shift in perspective is the first step in working a miracle. It is the moment the protagonist of his own life stops being a victim of circumstance and starts being the architect of his destiny. Analyze this deeply, and you see that the miracle is not an external event that drops from the sky, it is an internal realignment. The lesson here is that our greatest assets are often disguised as our most painful liabilities. When a person reaches the 0 point, they are stripped of the ego and the false pretenses that kept them tethered to a mediocre existence. The desperation they feel is actually the fuel required to launch them into a higher orbit of achievement. By embracing the pain rather than fleeing from it, they activate a psychological mechanism that forces the mind to search for creative solutions that were previously invisible. This is the alchemy of the soul, turning the lead of failure into the gold of opportunity by refusing to accept defeat as anything other than a temporary detour. The journey intensifies as we encounter the figures who have mastered the 12 great riches of life, none of which begin with a bank account. We see the character who possesses the riches of a positive mental attitude, standing amidst a storm of negativity and remaining unshaken, while others are drowning in the vitriol of gossip, envy, and doubt. This individual maintains a mind that is a fortress. They understand that the mind is a garden. If you do not plant the seeds of your own choosing, the winds of the world will blow in the weeds of destruction. The story illustrates the dramatic contrast between two neighbors, one who wakes up and curses the rain because it might ruin his shoes, and another who blesses the rain because it will nourish his fields. The first man lives in a self-made hell of minor inconveniences, while the second lives in a heaven of perpetual growth. The narrative paints a vivid picture of how a single thought, held with persistence and backed by a definite purpose, begins to attract its physical counterpart. It is as if the universe is a giant sounding board that echoes back the frequency we emit. If we emit fear, we receive reasons to be afraid. If we emit the frequency of a miracle, the world begins to rearrange itself to accommodate our vision. One of the most gripping accounts in this retelling involves the concept of the mastermind. The story takes us into the high-stakes boardrooms and the humble workshops where two or more people align their spirits toward a single burning objective. We see the electrical tension in the air when minds click into place, creating a third, invisible, super-intelligence that neither could possess alone. This is the miracle of cooperation. The narrative describes a struggling inventor who is at a dead end. His resources exhausted and his theories proven wrong. He enters into a mastermind alliance with a friend who brings not money, but a different perspective and an unshakable faith. Together, they tap into a reservoir of ideas that neither could reach in isolation. The synergy creates a psychic bridge to the source of all knowledge. And suddenly, the solution appears, not as a slow realization, but as a blinding flash of intuition. This is the moment the miracle is born. It is the proof that we were never meant to walk this path alone, and that our second self often speaks through the encouragement and insight of a trusted ally. The lesson embedded in this segment is the power of harmony. In a world that prizes rugged individualism, the book reveals that true miracles are often a collective effort. The mastermind is not just a business strategy, it is a spiritual law. When we harmonize our vibrations with others, we multiply our power exponentially. It teaches us that the ego is the greatest barrier to the miracle. When we let go of the need to be the sole author of our success and open ourselves to the infinite intelligence that flows through a harmonious group, we become conduits for something much larger than ourselves. The drama of human achievement is not found in the lonely struggle, but in the beautiful orchestration of multiple wills focused on a singular, noble aim. As the narrative progresses, it dives into the harrowing but redemptive story of a man who lost his physical sight only to find his internal vision. In the darkness of his blindness, he began to see the world not as a collection of physical objects, but as a playground of energy and opportunity. He stopped relying on the deceptive evidence of his physical eyes and began to trust the inner eye of his imagination. He learned to work his own miracle by visualizing his goals so clearly that they became more real to him than the darkness surrounding him. He didn't just hope for success, he lived in the feeling of it until the physical world had no choice but to manifest it. His story is a chilling reminder that most of us are blind despite having perfect vision, because we look only at what is instead of what could be. He becomes a beacon of light for others, proving that the only real handicaps are the ones we allow to take root in our minds. This part of the journey highlights the supreme importance of applied faith. Faith is not a passive belief, it is an active, aggressive state of mind. It is the willingness to step out into the void, trusting that the bridge will appear under your feet. The analysis of this man's life shows us that miracles require a vibrant expectancy. You must expect the miracle as surely as you expect the sun to rise. If there is a shadow of a doubt, the connection to the miracle-working power is severed. The narrative shows that the universe does not respond to wishes or wants, it responds only to commands, backed by an unwavering belief in their fulfillment. This is the psychological threshold that separates the masters from the masses. The story then shifts to the bustling streets of industry, where we find the principle of going the extra mile in action. We see a young clerk, unnoticed and underpaid, who decides to perform his duties as if he were the owner of the company. He arrives early, stays late, and looks for ways to provide value that far exceeds his meager salary. At first, his colleagues mock him, calling him a fool for giving away his labor for free. But he is not giving it away, he is investing it in the law of increasing returns. The narrative depicts the invisible forces that begin to gather around him. His attitude catches the eye of a powerful mentor, not because of his skills, but because of his spirit. The clerk's miracle is the sudden, vertical ascent of his career, jumping over those who did only what they were told. He realizes that the extra mile is the only part of the road that is never crowded. The underlying lesson here is the law of compensation. You cannot receive without giving, and you cannot give more than you receive in the long run. The miracle is simply the natural result of over-delivering. By doing more than what is expected, you put the world in your debt. The narrative stresses that this is a psychological maneuver that builds an irresistible personal magnetism. It turns you into a human magnet that attracts opportunities. resources, and people who want to be part of your energy. It is the ultimate antidote to the get-rich-quick mentality that plagues the unsuccessful. True miracles are built on the bedrock of service. And the narrative makes it clear that the size of your miracle is directly proportional to the magnitude of the service you render to others. We continue into the realm of cosmic habit force, the silent momentum that either carries a person to the heights of glory or drags them to the depths of despair. The story illustrates this through a woman who had spent her life in a cycle of poverty and bad relationships. She felt as though she was haunted by a jinx, an invisible force that sabotaged her every move. The narrative reveals that her jinx was nothing more than the habit force she had programmed into her own mind through years of negative self-talk and expectation of disaster. The turning point comes when she decides to break the rhythm. She begins to consciously replace her destructive habits with constructive ones, one small act at a time. The story vividly describes the struggle, the old habits fighting to stay alive. The first self, screaming that it's no use, and the eventual victory when the new habits take hold. Suddenly, the wind that was always against her is now at her back. Her life begins to flow with an effortless grace that seems like a miracle to everyone who knew her before. Analyzing this, we see that the miracle is actually the alignment of the individual with the natural laws of the universe. Habit is the tool that the infinite intelligence uses to make our actions automatic. If we align our habits with our goals, success becomes inevitable. The lesson is that we are not victims of fate, but victims of our own repetitive patterns. To work a miracle, one must have the courage to interrupt the pattern and install a new rhythm of success. This requires a level of self-discipline that most people are unwilling to exert. Which is why miracles are perceived as rare events. In reality, the miracle is always available to anyone willing to pay the price of self-mastery. The narrative shifts now to the psychological battlefield where the first self and the second self engage in a silent, cosmic duel for the soul of the individual. Imagine a woman who has spent her entire life defined by the limitations imposed upon her by her upbringing, her environment, and her own crushing self-doubt. She is the embodiment of the first self, that part of us which is bound by the five senses, tethered to the physical evidence of lack, and prone to the paralyzing grip of the 7 basic fears. She moves through her days like a ghost in her own life, convinced that miracles are reserved for the chosen few, the lucky, or the saintly. But the story takes a dramatic turn when she encounters a moment of absolute extremity. A dark night of the soul, where every external support is stripped away. In the silence of her desperation, she hears a voice that does not speak in words, but in a surge of unshakable confidence. This is the second self, the miracle worker that Hill identifies as the direct link to infinite intelligence. It is the part of the human psyche that remains untouched by failure and indifferent to the opinions of the world. The narrative follows her as she learns to silence the chatter of her fearful ego and allow this internal giant to take the reins. As she does, the world around her begins to shift in ways that defy logic. Opportunities appear where there were only stone walls. People who previously ignored her now offer their unbidden support. It is as if she has tapped into a hidden frequency of the universe. And the miracle is simply the broadcast of her new internal reality. Analyzing this transformation, we realize that the most significant barrier to any miracle is the first self's insistence on its own limitations. The lesson here is that we are lived by our fears until we consciously choose to be lived by our faith. The second self is not something we have to create, it is something we have to release. It is the original blueprint of our potential, buried under layers of social conditioning and past traumas. The narrative illustrates that the act of working a miracle is primarily an act of subtraction, removing the doubts, the excuses, and the false beliefs that prevent our innate power from flowing. When the woman in the story finally surrendered her need to control everything through her limited intellect and trusted the inner guide, she became a channel for a power that knows no bounds. This is the spiritual technology of the miracle, the recognition that the power to change our world is already within us, waiting for our permission to act. The story moves forward into the lives of those who have mastered the definiteness of purpose, the primary engine that drives the miracle working process. We see a man who was once a drifter, a human leaf, blown about by the winds of chance. With no clear direction and no burning desire. He was a master of generalities. A person who wanted success, but never defined what that meant. The narrative describes the gray, foggy atmosphere of his existence, a life of someday and maybe. The turning point occurs when he is challenged to write down exactly what he wants. When he wants it, and what he is willing to give in return. The moment he puts pen to paper, the fog begins to lift. The story portrays this act of writing as a sacred contract with the universe. Suddenly, his mind, which was once a scattered beam of light, becomes a concentrated laser. He stops seeing obstacles and starts seeing stepping stones. He realizes that the universe is a massive storehouse of energy that responds only to specific commands. The miracle in his life is the incredible speed with which his environment aligns with his written purpose. He discovers that once a person makes a firm decision, providence moves too, and a whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance. The lesson in this segment is the power of the written word and the law of attraction. A vague desire has no magnetic pull, but a definite purpose acts as a psychic magnet. The analysis reveals that the miracle is a matter of mental chemistry. When you mix a definite purpose with a positive mental attitude and persistent action, you create a compound that dissolves the impossible. The narrative teaches us that the reason most people never experience a miracle is that they never ask for one with enough specificity. They are like a traveler who goes to a ticket window and asks for a ticket, but cannot name a destination. The universe cannot grant what it cannot identify. By defining his purpose, the man in the story provided the blueprint for the miracle to build upon. He moved from being a victim of accidents to being a creator of incidents. As we delve deeper, the narrative explores the miracle of personal initiative. We encounter the story of a young woman working in a dead-end job. Surrounded by people who do only enough to get by, she is tempted to sink into the same lethargy. But she remembers the principle of the second self, and decides to take initiative where none is expected. She begins to solve problems that aren't hers to solve. She creates systems to help her coworkers and improves the quality of the company's service without being asked for a raise. The story describes the internal friction she feels, the pull of the first self, telling her she is being exploited. But she persists, driven by an inner vision of excellence. The miracle happens when the owner of a rival firm notices her work and offers her a position that skips 10 levels of the corporate ladder. Her colleagues call it luck, but the narrative shows it was the inevitable result of her self-started momentum. She did not wait for the miracle to come to her, she went out and manufactured it through her own actions. This part of the story emphasizes that personal initiative is the spark that ignites the fuel of purpose. The analysis shows that the miracle worker is always a self-starter. In a world of followers, the person who takes the lead, even in small, insignificant ways, sets themselves apart from the masses. The lesson is that the universe rewards the person who acts. Faith without works is dead, and a purpose without initiative is merely a daydream. The miracle is the response of the environment to the individual's refusal to remain stationary. By taking the first step into the unknown, the woman in the story forced the hand of destiny. She proved that the miracle is not a reward for waiting, but a response to movement. The narrative then shifts to the miracle of enthusiasm. We see a salesman who has lost his fire. His presentations are cold, logical, and utterly unconvincing. He is on the verge of being fired. His self-esteem at an all-time low. He believes his product is the problem, or the economy, or the competition. But through a chance encounter with a mentor, he learns that enthusiasm is the master key that opens the hearts of men. He begins to cultivate an inner glow, a burning belief in the value of his service. The story describes how his voice changes, how his eyes sparkle, and how his very presence begins to command attention. He doesn't change his product or his territory, he changes his vibration. The miracle is the sudden surge in his sales and the way people respond to him, not with arguments, but with yeses. He realizes that enthusiasm is contagious, and that when you are on fire with a purpose, People will come from miles around just to watch you burn. Analyzing this, we find that enthusiasm is the will in action. It is the emotional fuel that powers the second self. The lesson is that logic may convince the mind, but only emotion can move the soul. The miracle of influence is grounded in the salesman's ability to transfer his belief to others. This isn't about manipulation, it's about the radiance of truth. When you truly believe in what you are doing, you emit a frequency that bypasses the critical filters of others and speaks directly to their own second self. The narrative teaches that enthusiasm is a habit that can be cultivated. It is the practice of acting as if until the feeling becomes a reality. The salesman's miracle was the discovery that his internal state was the primary cause of his external results. We continue into the darker, more challenging territory of the miracle of learning from adversity. The story follows a family that has lost everything in a natural disaster. Their home, their business, and their security are gone in an instant. The first self of the father is screaming in agony, demanding to know why God has forsaken them. He is on the brink of bitterness, ready to give up on life. But as he stands amidst the ruins of his world, he remembers the seed of an equivalent benefit. He begins to look for the blessing in disguise. The narrative vividly portrays the struggle to find hope in the midst of ashes. He discovers that the disaster has freed him from a business he hated and a lifestyle that was suffocating his soul. He uses the insurance money, which he previously thought was insufficient, to start a new venture that he is truly passionate about. The miracle is not the restoration of what was lost, but the birth of something infinitely better. He realizes that the disaster was not a punishment, but a clearing of the ground for a greater structure to be built. The lesson here is one of the most profound in the entire book. Every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success. The analysis shows that we must develop the X-ray vision of the soul to see through the appearance of tragedy to the opportunity hidden within. The miracle is the transformation of the mind's reaction to the event. If you accept the disaster as a defeat, it becomes one. If you accept it as a lesson or a new beginning, it becomes the catalyst for a miracle. The father in the story did not work a miracle by changing the past, he worked it by changing his interpretation of the present. This is the ultimate power of the human spirit, the ability to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. The narrative then explores the miracle of the Golden Rule. We see a cutthroat businessman who has built his empire on the broken dreams of others. He is wealthy, but he is miserable, paranoid, and lonely. He believes that business is war, and that for him to win, others must lose. But his life begins to crumble as his health fails and his friends desert him. In his isolation, he begins to experiment with the principle of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. He starts to use his resources to help his employees, to improve his community, and to deal fairly with his competitors. The story describes the skepticism he faces and his own internal resistance. But slowly, a miracle of peace begins to settle over him. His health improves, his relationships are restored, and strangely, his business becomes even more profitable. He realizes that the Golden Rule is not just a moral precept, but a law of social gravitation. Whatever you put out into the world, you get back in kind, multiplied. The transformation of the cutthroat businessman serves as a profound testament to the miracle of a healthy mind. As he begins to distribute his wealth and influence with a spirit of genuine service, the narrative captures a shift in the very atmosphere surrounding him. No longer is he looking over his shoulder for the next betrayal, instead, he finds that the seeds of kindness he sows begin to sprout into an impenetrable forest of loyalty and goodwill. The story paints a vivid picture of a man who once had everything and possessed nothing, now finding that by giving himself away, he has finally claimed his soul. His physical ailments, once thought to be incurable by products of his stress-filled life, begin to recede. This is the miracle of psychosomatic healing, the realization that the body is but a mirror of the mind's internal weather. When he replaced the storms of greed and fear with the sunlight of the Golden Rule, his physical cells responded to the new command of harmony. Analyzing this, the lesson becomes clear. The Golden Rule is a mathematical law of the universe. It is the law of social gravitation. The analysis reveals that you cannot hurt another without hurting yourself. Nor can you help another without helping yourself. The miracle is the discovery that the ego's desire to win at the expense of others is actually a form of slow-motion suicide. By aligning his actions with the welfare of the whole, the businessman tapped into a collective power that far exceeded his individual cunning. The narrative teaches that the ultimate miracle is the transition from me to we, which paradoxically leads to the greatest individual fulfillment. The script now enters its final, most intense phase, focusing on the miracle of the cosmic habit force as the ultimate architect of destiny. We follow the story of an elderly man who, looking back on a life of mediocrity, decides that it is never too late to work a miracle. He realizes that his entire existence has been a series of accidental habits that have hardened into a rhythm of failure. He decides to use his remaining years to prove that the human will can override decades of conditioning. The narrative describes his painstaking process of rewiring his brain. Every morning, he speaks to his second self with the authority of a commander. He visualizes his new life with such intensity that his nervous system cannot distinguish between the visualization and reality. The story depicts the miracle of the final hour, the man's sudden rise to prominence as a writer and speaker, sharing the wisdom of his transformation with a world hungry for hope. He becomes a living proof that the sun can rise at midnight if the mind refuses to accept the darkness. This final movement of the story highlights the concept of applied faith in its purest form. The analysis shows that cosmic habit force is the universe's way of making our dominant thoughts permanent. If we do not consciously choose our habits, the environment will choose them for us. The miracle is the act of breaking the rhythm and establishing a new constructive cycle. It teaches us that time is not the enemy is the lack of a definite will. The elderly man's success was not a stroke of luck, but the result of his refusal to be a victim of his past. He worked his miracle by recognizing that the greatest secret is that we are the masters of our own habit force. The core message of ***. You can work your own miracles, ***, is that every human being is born with the divine right to control their own mind and, through that control, to command the forces of the universe. Napoleon Hill intends for the reader to understand that miracles are not violations of natural law, but the result of a higher application of law. We are all equipped with a first self that experiences the world of limitations and a second self that has access to infinite intelligence. The transition from one to the other is the process of working a miracle. It requires a definite purpose, a positive mental attitude, the willingness to go the extra mile, and an unshakable faith that every adversity contains the seed of a greater benefit. The book's ultimate meaning is that you are not a pawn of fate, but a creator of destiny. You are the alchemist of your own life, capable of turning the leaden weights of failure into the golden wings of achievement. The miracle you seek is not outside of you, it is the power within you waiting for your command.